Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. I've got an exciting video for you today. We are going to take a look at a brand new front end that just released for Android, and this is EmulationStation. Now this might look very familiar because this front end is used also on a bunch of other Linux-based handhelds. And I'm a big fan of EmulationStation because it gives you a seamless experience when it comes to browsing your game library. And in particular, when it comes to Android, it's hard to find a launcher that gives you that same kind of feeling. Well, I'm happy to report that this version of EmulationStation for Android does all of that and then some. In fact, this is a full port of the desktop edition of this front end. And as a result, we're going to have full functionality. That means we'll be able to scrape our box art as well as videos and have a screensaver, change out our themes, all the things that you would do on any other handheld. And I would say that once you've got everything configured with the emulators as well as this front end, it really elevates that Android gaming experience. So in this video, we're going to break it up into chunks. First, we're going to download it and install EmulationStation and do some quick configuration, and I'm going to also show you how to sync it up with your games as well as your favorite emulators. After that, we're going to scrape some box art, and then also I'm going to show you some tips and tricks when it comes to actually setting this as your home launcher on Android. And that in particular is probably going to be one of the neatest things about this whole video because it really consoleizes your Android handheld. Anyway, as you can already tell, I am super pumped for this video, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, as we jump in, there are three notes that I want to talk about when it comes to this app. Number one, this is a paid app. It was $5.39 US for me plus tax, which came out to like $5.60 something. And it is a one-time purchase, and you can use it on any Android device after that, as long as it's running Android 11 or higher. Next, the app is not on the Google Play Store just yet. There's been some issues actually getting it published, so right now it's only available on the Amazon App Store. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to go through that process and install it on any Android app from Amazon, but that does mean it'll require you to have an Amazon account to download it in the first place. Now, the developer is actually actively working on getting it on the Play Store, so if that changes and it is available on Google, I will put that in a pinned comment down below. So before you go through the Amazon installation process in this video, check the pinned comment to see if it is on the Play Store. That'll be a lot easier. And then finally, the last note is that this is only a front end, so it's not going to download or configure your emulators for you. You're still going to have to do all that stuff yourself. This really just kind of puts it all together at the end. Now, luckily, I've got a bunch of different guides to help you get set up when it comes to emulation on an Android device. You've got a few options. I've made an Android emulation starter guide. This is just kind of a generic guide to help you get set up with things like RetroArch and other emulators. But I've also made quite a few guides specific to Android devices. My most recent one is for the Retroid Pocket 4 and 4 Pro, and I've also made one for the AYN Odin 2. Both of these are very detailed guides, and I think they would work with any more modern Android-based device, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be a Retroid Pocket 4 or a Odin 2, because the process for setting up an Android-based device is going to be pretty similar. Another tool worth considering is we now have a test version of EmuDeck for Android. This one is very much so in an early stage of development, but if you are a patron for EmuDeck, you can get some early access. And this tool is pretty neat. I've been messing around with it for the past few days. Essentially what it'll do is it'll download and install all the emulators for you and then also configure them as well. Regardless of what path you take in order to set things up, I'm going to go under the assumption that you've already configured and downloaded all of your emulators already. So at this point, we're ready to install EmulationStation. And like I mentioned, we're going to use the Amazon App Store to get this all done, and you can't go through the Play Store to get this. You actually have to go to the Amazon website. So open up a browser on your device and then type in the word Amazon App Store. And chances are the first result you're going to see in that browser is going to be to that App Store. Once you're there, go ahead and scroll down until you find a button that says Get Amazon App Store. Tap on that. It might take a couple seconds to start the download. It might even warn you about being potentially dangerous. Just go ahead and click, yeah man, I want to do it. After you've tapped a bunch of times to confirm the installation, it'll say that the app is installed. Go ahead and tap on that to open it up. And then at that point, it's going to ask you to sign into your Amazon account. Just go ahead and do that. Once that is set up, you're going to be greeted with the Amazon App Store front page. So here, just tap on the search bar and then type in the name of the app. It's going to be ES-DE. That stands for EmulationStation Desktop Edition. And this is the exact same app that we found on Windows and Mac OS and the Steam Deck. It's just been ported over by that same developer. Now, once you get to the app page, it's not going to say the word install. It's going to ask you to buy it. But I've already gone ahead and bought it. Here's my receipt so you can see that it cost me $5.64 after tax and all that. it. Anyway, once you've gone through and paid for it, just tap on the install button, and then you're going to get a bunch of other prompts asking you to go and continue and then allow for it to install unknown apps. And then after that, you're going to tap on setup complete and then finally install again. We're going to do a lot of tapping in this video, so it's good to just get used to that. Anyway, once you've installed the app, we are now ready to open it up and actually get it configured. When you first start it up, you're going to be greeted with the front menu page. It's going to walk you through the first configuration process. First thing we need to do is go into the permissions screen and enable storage permissions. So tap on that and then select allow access to manage all files. Once that's done, we can go over to the next tab, which is going to be to select the application data directory. This essentially is going to be where you want to store your configuration settings, your games list, your scraped box art, all that stuff. Now by default, it's going to want to save it on the internal storage, and that's actually what I do in this video footage right here. However, in hindsight, I think it's better to actually go to the SD card and save it there. That way, if you use this card in a different Android-based device, you can just pull over all that stuff. That means you won't have to re-scrape your box art every single time you try to set up a new device. Anyway, like I mentioned in this footage, I am going to pick the default home directory, but I got a little bit wiser by the time I got to the next section, which is to select our game or ROMs directory. By now, I realized that I didn't want to store everything on the internal storage, but I wanted to put it on my SD card. So let me show you the process of getting that set up here by using the ROMs folder as an example. So here by default, you can see that it's going to odin2/ROMs. That means it wants to go into the internal storage. But we don't want to do that. We want to put it on the SD card. So I'm going to click on the little hamburger icon on the top left, and then I'm going to choose my SD card. After that, you need to make your own folder. Now, all my games are already in a folder named Games, but I want to start clean with a brand new EmulationStation installation. So I'm going to tap on that little plus folder icon on the top right, and I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it ROMs, capital R-O-M, lowercase s. And this is the same naming convention that the app was trying to do by default. So now I'm asking it to select my ROMs directory within my Samsung SD card and then the ROMs folder that we just made. Again, it'll ask for permissions once you do that. And then next it's going to ask if we want to create system directories. This is basically going to put a bunch of blank folders inside of that ROMs folder. And then from within here, we're going to put all of our game files. So I'm going to tap the create them button. And once that's done, it's going to say that the setup is now complete. Now, right off the bat, we can't actually do anything with EmulationStation. So once we actually get into the interface, it's just going to ask us whether or not we want to create new directories, which we have already done. Instead, we're just going to navigate to the word quit and then press the A button. So now we've successfully installed EmulationStation and created all of our blank directories in which to put all of our games. And I bet you know what we're going to do next, and that is we're going to move all of our games into those folders that EmulationStation just created. And so you might have already guessed, but we're going to go into the Files app. And now if we press that hamburger icon again, if we scroll down into the Samsung SD card, we will see that there's a folder called ROMs, and that's the one that we just created. And within that, you'll see a bunch of blank folders. This is where we need to put our game or ROM files. But I already do have my games on this SD card, they're just in a different folder. If we go back into the SD card and then look into my games folder, you can see that I've already created a bunch of different folders already when I previously set up this device for emulation. So what I want to do here is I want to grab these game files and then move them over to the new EmulationStation directory. To do that, I'll go into one of these game directories, I'll go over to the top right and then select all. After that, I'm going to go to that top right menu again and now select Move To. This is going to ask us where do we want to move the files to, and we're going to go back to our SD card and now into that ROMs folder. And now I need to find the corresponding folder for whatever games I've highlighted. In this example, we're going to do Game Boy Advance, so I'll go into the GBA folder, and then once I'm there, I'm going to tap the Move button. And that's it. It's going to move all my game folders from the previous directory into the new one. Now, if you haven't already made a game directory and you just need to actually put your games onto the SD card for the very first time, you don't have to go through this process. You just have to move everything into the ROMs folder that EmulationStation already created. This is kind of an extra step for us just because I'm assuming that you already have a device that's been set up before. Either way, I'll show a couple other examples. So let's do it with 3DS. Same thing here. We'll go into the 3DS folder, and then I'm going to select all of my 3DS game files and then select Move To. Then I'll go back to my SD card into that ROMs folder, then find the 3DS folder. This one's a little bit tricky because it's not in the 3DS folder, it's in an N3DS folder. But once you find that folder, just tap on that Move button and you'll be good to go. Now there are a couple other ones that are tricky, mostly because there are some regional variations with some of these games. Let's use Super Nintendo as an example. We're going to go into that folder, then select all, and then move to. Now when we get into the ROMs folder, if we go down to the SNES folder, you'll see there's a couple different options. There's a regular SNES folder, but then one called SNES-NA. That second one is going to be for people in North America, so me in the United States or maybe someone in Canada. But if you're from Europe, you would want to put it in the regular SNES folder. Either way, like a true-blooded American, I'm going to use the SNES-NA folder. And that's really about it. You just want to rinse and repeat. This might take a while depending on the size of your library. Altogether, it probably took me maybe 10 minutes to move all my games over. And once you've moved all of your games into the appropriate folders within the Emulation Station ROM folder, we're ready to open that app up again and see what it's going to be like. And sure enough, right off the bat, it's already detecting every game that we've put into these folders, and we can navigate through and actually start up our games. Now, like I mentioned before, this is going to hinge on the fact that you've already pre-configured all your emulators. So let's just do a quick test right off the bat, and I'm going to choose one that's probably going to be pretty easy to launch. I'm going to use Sega Genesis as the example. This one usually will use a RetroArch core, and there's a very specific one that most people will use. And sure enough, if I go into the games list and I pick a game, it is going to launch. And that is because I've already installed RetroArch and I have installed that specific core that Emulation Station is looking for. So in reality, I just got very lucky that everything was pre-configured and we are good to go. And this will definitely not be the same for every system, but we will go over that later in this video. But for now, there are a couple other things I want to take care of. First things first, I keep seeing these controls on the screen that I don't really need to see. So what I want to do is press Start to open up the Emulation Station menu. Within here, there's an option that says Input Device Settings. We're going to go into here. And if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's an option for Enable Touch Overlay, and that's turned on by default. We're going to turn this off because we have built-in controls on the Odin 2 that I'm testing this with. Now, if you're using this on a phone that doesn't have built-in controllers, you might want to have those touch overlays, but for everybody else, I would recommend turning this off. It is going to give you a warning saying that, hey, if you turn this off, you're going to need to use controls, but if you have a dedicated handheld device like we're using right now, then it's not going to be a problem. Okay, now that we've gotten rid of those controls, now let's make everything a little bit prettier. We're going to go into the UI settings and go into the theme downloader. And thankfully within here we have the full repository of themes available for Emulation Station Desktop Edition. So you can scroll through here and look at whatever ones you like, and then you can press the A button to download them to your device. Depending on the theme, it might take a couple minutes to download, so I'm going to speed through the process right here just so you can get a feel for it. And you can always go back and download more if you would like. Once you're done, you can go into UI settings, and then under theme, you can now choose from the ones that you've downloaded. So for example, let's try out the one that's called Art Book next. This one is found in a lot of custom firmwares like Jealous as well as Amber Elec. And sure enough, here we are. We can see every system and we can navigate through. It's really bright and colorful and looks really nice. And you can change out these themes and modify them on the fly within the settings. Now next, I want to associate every single system with the appropriate emulator. Like I mentioned before, I've already set up my device, so I know which emulators I want to use for each system. And by default, this app is going to choose a bunch of emulators for you, but those may not be the specific ones that you want to use. So let's go ahead and modify them to make sure that everything matches. We're going to go down into the section that says Other Settings. From here, the first option that we have is called Alternative Emulators. Go into there. And here you'll see a list of all these systems that you have ROMs for within the directory, and it's going to give you a list of all the emulators that will launch when you try to open a game. And if there's a mismatch here, then the game is going to crash. So I want to go through here quickly and just kind of associate each of these appropriately. For example, under Dreamcast, the one I like to use is called Redream. However, one thing of note is that it actually crashed even though I had set it up appropriately. So you may want to use something like the Flycast core within RetroArch instead. And it is something I reported to the Emulation Station developer, but I don't think that's the issue. I think it has something to do with the Redream app. Either way, for the example, I'm going to use Redream as my emulator. Now going down the line, some of these are appropriate for what I usually recommend, for example with Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. However, when you get to GameCube, you can see that by default it says Dolphin. And that doesn't necessarily mean the Dolphin emulator app, that means the Dolphin RetroArch core. So I am going to go here and change it from the default one to the standalone emulator. And I found that multiple versions of the standalone app actually work just fine, including the one that I download directly from their website. Let's do the same thing with MAME. This is one that has multiple different MAME cores, and the one I prefer to use is called MAME 2003 Plus. Same thing with Nintendo 3DS, I prefer to use the Citra Canary standalone app, so I'm going to change it to that one. And so on and so forth. For example, with Nintendo 64, I like to use the Mupen 64 Plus FC app. Now generally I use the Pro one, which is the paid version of the app, and it didn't really matter. I just picked this one and it did work. And same thing happened with the PlayStation 2 emulator. I usually use the Neither SX2 fork, but the Aether SX2 option right here actually worked. Anyway, I would recommend going through this and associating each system with the appropriate emulator for you. And once you have that done, let's start launching these games to see how they fare. Now I found that by default, any of the RetroArch cores are probably going to work just fine. So it really comes down to making sure that you've already installed RetroArch and you've also downloaded the appropriate core, and then all the other things that are required to set up RetroArch like I show in my other setup guides. Either way, my main point here is that if you are planning on using RetroArch, it seems that just right out of the box, once you've associated the appropriate RetroArch core, it's all going to launch just fine. I really found that the only time I ran into issues is when I tried to launch a standalone emulator. And it took me a minute to figure out what was happening here because I do have these emulators installed, but it's because the emulator itself doesn't have the association with the new file folder that we put all of our games into. So what you're going to have to do is open up each of these emulators on their own and then reassociate the file path where the games are. I'll do a few of these as an example. We'll start with the DuckStation emulator. For this, we'll go into the menu and then select App Settings. Now we're going to scroll over to the right until we find the section that says Game List. And you can see here it has the original games folder that we used previously. But now that we've moved everything over into that ROMs folder, we need to change that. So I'm going to tap on that trash can icon to get rid of this old association. And now I'll tap on that plus button on the bottom right. Next, we'll navigate to the ROM/PSX folder. This is where the games are now being stored. We'll tap on Use this folder and then allow the permissions. And now we're good to go. We can actually exit out of the app and then go back into EmulationStation and try it out. So here I am trying to start up Crash Team Racing, and yeah, sure enough, it launched directly into the game. So really that's all you have to do for each of these. If you've already set up these emulators to a different file association path, you have to go and change those associations. And one thing of note, when closing some of these apps, it won't go directly back into EmulationStation. Instead, it'll go back to the app. So you're going to have to press the back button one more time or maybe swipe from the left in order to get back to EmulationStation. And so it is one extra step in the process to get back to the EmulationStation interface, but it is pretty simple to get there. Let's do another app just to make sure that you were paying attention. We're going to open up Neither SX2 for PlayStation 2. This one is set up very similar to DuckStation, so we're going to go back into the menu, then App Settings, then we'll go over to Games List and delete the old Games List and then add the new one. Again, we're going to go back to the card and then the ROMs folder and then find PS2. After that, we're going to allow the permissions so that it can see these files, and the app might take a second to scrub through the folder again to make sure it's got all the files loaded up. After that, we're good to go. We can go back into EmulationStation, then start up a PS2 game, and sure enough, it's going to launch directly into it. Let's do two more just to make sure that you've got this down. We're going to go into the Citra emulator for 3DS. Here, we're going to scroll down until we select Games folder, and then we'll go back to the SD card, then to ROMs, and then find that N3DS folder that we moved all the games into previously. Same thing here, just make sure you grant the permissions to access the files. And now we're good to go. Let's open up a 3DS game within EmulationStation, and yeah, sure enough, here is Donkey Kong Country Returns. So I think you've got the hang of it at this point. You just have to go into each of these emulator apps and then reassociate the files. Let's do one more just to make sure you're good to go. This time we'll do Dolphin because we can knock out both GameCube and Wii. And this is super simple. Just tap on the Add Games button on the bottom right. And you guessed it, we're going to go into the SD card and then ROMs and then find the appropriate folder. It doesn't matter which one you do first, GameCube or Wii, just make sure you go through and pick each of these. And once you've done that, assuming that you've already configured the Dolphin emulator to work with your device, you're good to go. So let's go back into EmulationStation, go into the GameCube folder, and then pick a game. And just like that, we've launched directly from EmulationStation into Animal Crossing. And so in a nutshell, that's how you set up all of the appropriate emulators for each of your systems within EmulationStation and to make sure that they're all going to launch. Now that we've got that set up, let's make this even prettier to navigate through the menu. We're going to scrape all of our box art next. We're going to use a tool called Scraper to do this, which we can do directly onto this device, which is super handy. And it's the first menu option in the main menu. Now, once you get inside, there's a couple things we do need to configure. First, I would recommend going down to the Scrape These Systems section, and then pick whatever systems you want to scrape. You can do one at a time, or you can do them all at once. Just for this example, we're going to do Nintendo Entertainment System to keep this a little bit simple. Once you've selected that, we can back out to the main scraper menu, and the next section will be the account settings. If you haven't already, you're going to need to go to this website. It is screenscraper.fr. Within here, just go ahead and register for an account. It's totally free. Once you've done that, go back into EmulationStation and under account settings, put in your username and password that you just created. Now, if you'd like, you can go through and toggle all of the different content and image settings. Personally, I leave them on the default settings, which means it's just going to scrape everything, which is going to work with every theme that you try to use it with. One thing I do recommend doing is go into the other settings section, and then right at the top there's going to be a region option. I would change this to whatever region you want to see the box art for. And I'm going to change this from Europe to the US just to make sure I see that nice American box art. And that's about it when it comes to these settings, so we're ready to start the scraping process. Just go ahead and press start, and then it's going to go through and look at the names of each of your files within those folders, and then it'll go back into that screen scraper database to make sure it has the right file, and then it's going to download all of the art for it. And as long as your ROMs are appropriately named, it should just work out of the box. Bear in mind that this process might take some time, so if you have a very large library, I would just walk away and come back to it later. Maybe grab a couple snacks and drinks while you're at it. And also bear in mind that the free version of Screen Scraper is limited to 20,000 downloads a day. That might sound like a lot, but you have to bear in mind that each game is going to download an image and a video and whatever else you chose to download. So it's not necessarily 20,000 games, but 20,000 pieces of media. Either way, if you do reach that limit, you can wait until the next day and then try it again, or if you'd like, you can just join their Patreon and it'll give you a higher limit. For example, I pay $2 a month and that gives me 50,000 downloads a day. Anyway, once you're finished, it'll say that the scraping has completed. And now if we go into the NES setting, you can see here we have this beautiful art that we can scroll through. And if we hover over the game for a moment, it's actually going to start playing a video. This is very rare for an Android front end like this to play a video like this, and so that's super cool. There's also another great feature when you download the video like this. It's called the screensaver function. We'll do that near the end of the video. Either way, that's the very basics to get set up when it comes to Emulation Station. And chances are, if you're happy with this setup, you might want to make this your default launcher. So in the next section of this video, I'm going to show you how to set this up so that when you start up your device, it's going to go directly into Emulation Station while still giving you access to the rest of your machine. It is a bit of a workaround to get this all running, and that's because Emulation Station is not a native Android app. Instead, it was built in C++, and so because of that, it cannot be chosen as your default launcher. But luckily, it's not too hard to get this set up. We just need to use 3 other apps to kind of get everything configured. The first one is called AnyHome. This essentially will allow you to take any app and make it its home launcher. So right off the bat, we are already good to go in the fact that this will boot directly into Emulation Station. However, there's a couple reasons why this is not ideal. The first is the fact that once you're in Emulation Station, it's very hard to access any other app unless it's for emulation. So for example, if you wanted to start up an Android game, or maybe you wanted to do some game streaming, you wouldn't have that option if you could only get into Emulation Station. So instead, we also need to access our other apps, and that's what the other 2 apps are going to do for us. The first app we're going to use is called Tile Shortcuts. This allows us to add any app to our notification tray. That's the same place when you swipe down from the top to like change the brightness or maybe turn off the Wi-Fi, you can now put an app there instead. Now this app is free, but if you want to have more than 3 apps within your notification tray, it does cost like $1.50. But thankfully we only need to make one shortcut for all the other apps, and that's going to be using another app called My Drawer. This one allows us to access all of our apps with the tap of one button. And it's also a free app, but it has ads. If you want to remove those ads, it's $2. But if you don't mind those ads and you want a free solution, you can totally do that as well. Anyway, I recommend going into the Play Store and downloading these 3 apps, and I'll have them all linked down in the video description below as well. So now we're going to configure all 3 of these to make sure they're all working in sync. We're going to do this in reverse order. We're going to start with the My Drawer app first. If you open it up, you'll see that it just has a listing of all your apps. And here you can do quite a few configuration things. So we go into these settings and then under categories. Within here, you'll see there's a bunch of different app categories. And by default, these are all going to be turned on. I would recommend turning these off because they get kind of distracting and I don't think they're customizable anyway. And so I'm personally looking for a very clean interface. So with all those unchecked, this is what your menu screen is going to look like. And there is a bit of configuration you can do in that you can hide certain apps if you don't want to see them. And to do that, you just have to long press on the app and then choose hide. It's not going to uninstall it, but it'll remove it from the My Drawer app. And so this will give you a nice clean interface once you go through and remove all the apps that you don't ever actually want to access. Okay, so that's it. My Drawer is now configured. Now let's move over to Tile Shortcuts. This is going to allow us to add this app into our top menu. When you open the app, it might show you something a little bit different. It'll try to walk you through the whole setup, but I would recommend just tapping through all that until you get this blank interface right here. We're going to tap on the plus button, and then under Tile Type, we're going to tap on App. And from here, we're going to scroll down until we find the app called My Drawer that we just configured. It's going to give you an option of different icons to use. These all look a little bit funky, but it really doesn't matter which one you pick. After that, press on the checkmark button and we're good to go. Now, when we swipe down from the top, you won't actually see the app, at least initially. Instead, what you want to do is you want to tap on that little pencil icon on the bottom right. This will give us the ability to drag all of our tiles around. And at the very bottom, you'll see one that's called Tile 1 or Tile Shortcuts. Go ahead and long press on this and then move it all the way up to the top. and you can choose wherever you would like to place it. And once you're happy with it, you can just remove your finger from the app and now it's going to save there. And at this point, we're almost done. We have one more app to configure. We're going to tap on the AnyHome icon and then it's going to give us a list of apps. And here we're going to tap on the EmulationStation app. At this point, we're almost done. We just have to ensure that AnyHome is our default home launcher. And to do this, we need to exit EmulationStation. I recommend swiping from the bottom and then closing and killing that app. That'll take us back to the home page, and then we can go into our settings menu within Android. Here you want to type in the word home and then search. It's going to give you an option that says default home app. Tap on that setting, you'll see a bunch of different options, and we're going to change it to AnyHome. And just like that, we are now good to go. So EmulationStation will be our default front end anytime we start up the device, and it'll give us that really seamless user interface. Now, if we swipe down from the top, we'll have those Android notification settings, and within there, you'll see the option for My Drawer. If we tap on that, it's going to give us a listing of all the other apps that we would need to access. So if there's a certain game or maybe Game Pass or something like that that you want to access, this is how you would do it. And then of course, once you're done with that, you can close out of that game and it'll take you right back to EmulationStation. Okay, so now that we have everything configured and EmulationStation is our primary front end, I do want to show off a couple other things that are really great about this whole setup. Like I've already showed, once you have all your box art scraped, it's going to look beautiful, and then also if you hover over a game, it's going to show a video running too. And like I mentioned, there are very few Android front ends that will give you this video option, so I think this is super cool. And another added bonus once you've scraped all of your media is that you can use the screensaver function. There's a couple things that'll happen. Number one, if you just leave the device alone for 5 minutes, it'll start, or if you're in the main menu, you can press the X button and that'll also launch the screensaver. This is going to play a 30-second video of all the games that you scraped the box art for. And if you'd like, if you press the A button, it'll actually launch that game. So I've always found this to be a really neat function within EmulationStation. If you've got a bunch of games installed on your device and you're not really sure what you want to try out, maybe you want to get a preview of a couple options, you can use the screensaver to kind of go through a random process. It's kind of like listening to your music library on shuffle, in the sense that you already added everything into your library, but you just don't know what to pick. Anyway, that's one of my favorite features of EmulationStation, and I love the fact that we now have it on Android. And then of course, now that I've set it up as my primary launcher, if I swipe down from the bottom, I can find my Drawer app, and then I can tap on that, and then I can open up anything else as well. And so I think all told, this is a really seamless experience. In fact, now that I've spent maybe about an hour setting everything up, I am ready to use this full time with the Odin 2. Before this, my primary front end was Daijisho, and one of the main reasons I liked it was because it was so similar to EmulationStation. But now that we have the real deal, I think I'm going to be sticking with this for quite some time. And I know a lot of people don't like using Android devices because it doesn't have that really all-encompassing seamless experience like it does on other Linux handhelds. And I think now that we have EmulationStation on Android, it closes that gap by a lot. So let me know what you think. Is this going to be a revolutionary thing for your Android device like it is for me? Or is there another launcher that you prefer? Let me know down in the comments below because I love checking these out. And I'll have links to all this stuff in the video description. As always, thank you for watching and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.